Okay, so let me do this. Okay. Go to here. Come on, get up there. All right, there we go. Okay, well, thank you for having me. I joined this club 26 years ago. That's how long I've been shooting. So I lived in Cranford with my wife Kathy and my two boys. And when I turned 50, I said, I got to figure out something I want to do when I retire. I think ahead. You got to think. You got to plan ahead. So I was always interested in photography. So I decided to start taking photography up. And I saw something, I guess, in the local paper about this club, and I came and I joined it. And, I spent a lot of years here, and it really between this club and the Camera Naturalist Photo Club, which I also joined a year later, that pretty much got me started in photography and really took me a long way. So tonight we're going to talk about painting with cameras, and really this is kind of make sure I can move this. Kind of a part of my photography I'm fascinated with. I started it very early on because I found some other photographers like Tony Sweet, if you're familiar with him, who was into this type of thing. So I started learning about it more and more. So let's get started. Make sure this works. Okay, everything's working.
Dave.
All right, so when you're doing painting with cameras, I'm thinking of creating art. And I think of painting, I think of painters, I think of people using mixed media, different ways to create imagery. So I think it's important to understand what is art. And it's really the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form, such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty and their emotional power. I think we can all agree that beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Dave, we're seeing two slides at the same time.
What's that?
We're seeing two slides at the same time. We're seeing the next slide and we're seeing the current slide that you're talking.
All right, thanks for letting me know.
Sure.
Okay.
Up there it looks right, but
all right, I know there's a setting that you change for this. No, that ain't it. That ain't it. Oh, come on. Nope. I know there's a setting to be able to use this.
your screen looks like. See, you have the full screen.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect.
All right, I figured it out. You know, these hybrid, I did one other hybrid meeting a couple of years ago and it was like a disaster. So I'm in a learning process. Okay, so beauty is in the eye of the beholder and emotions are very personal. So when we go to looking at, you know, art in a museum, everybody will look at the same piece of art and everybody will have kind of a different emotion or different appeal to it. So I put these up. And now I do have an audience. Usually I don't have an audience. I'm doing this on Zoom. So I do have an audience. I'd like to ask anybody kind of vote on these pieces of art. And which one do you like the best? Who likes the upper right-hand corner? Upper left-hand corner. Okay. And you two are with me. I kind of like that too. Lower left.
I like that one.
All right. I like that one too. And lower right. Okay. So the ones that kind of, I think, have more of an appeal are the ones that are more, can be relatable. The first one is a person, so you can relate to that. The one in the lower left, to me, kind of almost looks like a landscape. You know, I see a sky, I see mountains, I see lakes, so I see different things in there. So I think visually they're more relatable than some of the abstracts that we see on the other side of the page. Kathy and I went to the Philadelphia Museum of Art several years ago, and I had to take a picture of these two pieces of art. Each of these artists had their own room dedicated to all their work. And I don't know about you, but the black box just doesn't do it for me. I couldn't relate to it. I don't know what the artist is trying to say. And the other one, the one on the right, reminded me of what my granddaughter did with a crayon on my walls when she was 3 years old. But again, each of these artists had a whole room dedicated to this type of work for each of them. So, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and apparently the beholder who had the money to put these in the museum thought they were pretty good. So you think about photography, and when I joined this club, the first thing we did was all the competitions and all the judges telling you what's good and bad about your picture. So early on, I decided, my pictures have to be sharp. They have to be properly exposed, no detail in the shadows, no blown out highlights, no distracting elements, placement of the subject, the rule of thirds, tight crops. These are all the things we hear from the judges. And as a new photographer, I listened to everything they had to say because I wanted to get more ribbons, right? The ribbons are really important. At least when I started out, they were. So when I take photographs, I try to do it realistically. This is my granddaughter when she was about 3 years old, and I wanted it in focus. I wanted kind of her looking into the frame. I love wildlife photography, and I've been to Silver Salmon Creek in Alaska several times to photograph the coastal brown bears. And there I want them sharp. I want a nice background that's not distracting. And all the things I learned when I was starting out. Flower photography, again, clean background. The subject is sharp, contrasting colors. These are the things I was trying to achieve. And of course, when I do landscape photography, I really want my landscapes to look realistic. I want to create them as I saw them when I was in the field. Now, you can use your computer to create artistic images. You can take a photo, bring it into your computer, and there's all kinds of filters out there that can help you create some unique looks and feels. One thing I like to do is to use texture overlay. And texture overlays are fun. I think they create a very artistic look for a photograph. But this is something I do in post-processing, not necessarily with my camera. In Photoshop, if any of you use Photoshop, there's a gallery of filters that you can use. So I could take this picture of noble light, select one of the artistic filters, and make it look like a watercolor. Okay, so this is another way of creating artistic looks to your photographs. But these are all done in the computer. What we're going to talk about tonight is what you do when you're doing it out in the field with your camera. So I want you to think about, just like an artist uses a palette of paint to create the paintings, I want you to think of your camera as a paintbrush. And some of the techniques I'm going to talk about tonight are ways that you can do that. So tonight we're going to talk about intentional camera movement, motion blurs, zooms and turns, multiple exposure, long exposures, finding art in nature, and finally a little bit about reflections, how to use reflections to create more artistic images. So let's imagine. Imagination, the faculty or action of forming new ideas, images, or concepts of external objects not present to the senses. So normally when we're out photographing, we see something beautiful or something interesting, and we want to capture it as it exists. So what we're going to think about tonight is I'm going to encourage you to imagine different ways of looking at and capturing the same types of subjects. Multiple exposures, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, was something I started very early on. The first multiple exposure photography I saw was at the Guggenheim Museum, and they had a photography exhibit. And there were these two photographers, and of course this is back in the days of film photography. And what they did is they would take their camera, one photographer would take the camera, go out and shoot a roll of film in Central Park. Then they would re-roll the film, hand it to the other photographer. He would go out and shoot whatever he wanted in Central Park, and then as a result, they would merge those, that you would get multiple exposures on the film. And so these guys using this little technique ended up with obviously large prints in the Guggenheim Museum. So I thought early on, well, this creative multiple exposure idea, something I should think about. This was one of my early attempts. My wife and I were in Italy. I was judging a photo competition there. And this was the bed and breakfast we were staying at while I was there. So I attempted a multiple exposure, taking several shots by moving the camera around. And I posted it on Facebook. And I was really excited. I didn't get a lot of comments, but one comment came from the father of the Polish judge who was working with me. And he said something in Polish. And I said, wow, I'm getting international recognition. I was really excited. Okay, so this is what he wrote. He wrote down, I got to flip for my arrows here. There it goes. Okay. So this is what he wrote. And it looked like kudos there. I mean, it looked like he had an explanation more. He was really excited about this. But I made the mistake of hitting the C translation button, which I never should have done, because I was really happy about this. And what he actually was saying, that something or someone failed. So apparently this gentleman did not appreciate my creativity. But that did not discourage me. I continued trying this technique on the whole trip while we were in Italy, and tried some other techniques as well. But the point here is that you're going to try some of this stuff, and not everybody's going to appreciate it. Okay, so let's take a look at intentional camera motion. Basically, what you want to do is you want to disable the camera and lens image stabilization, because now you want to try to make something blurry creatively. So the image, by having image stabilization, of course, the camera's going to try to make it sharp, right? So you want to disable that. And then you set your ISO around 100, close down your aperture so you're not letting in a lot of light. And then as you're taking the picture, you're going to slightly move the camera up and down. And what I normally do is I'll move the camera up and down and get into a rhythm. And then as I'm moving it, I hit the shutter button. I continue moving it until the picture's taken, and I continue moving it afterwards. Kind of a golf swing. After you hit the ball, you don't stop your swing, you swing all the way through. So basically you do the same thing. So you start the movement, hit the shutter button, keep moving, picture's taken, keep moving another second, and that's how you finish the capture. So this is one of my early attempts at intentional camera motion. And this was done up in the Adirondacks. This was the shoreline of Racket Lake in the Adirondack Park. And so I saw these trees and I thought this was really nice. And again, I had been stimulated to try this from Tony Sweet, who does this very well. And so I took this picture and I kind of liked it. So I made a print and I entered a competition in Somerset County, a print competition. So I sent it in. And I got a call about a month and a half later. The woman who ran the competition says, "Congratulations, you won first place." I said, "Wow, that was pretty good, $150 and everything." I was very excited. She goes, "But I want to tell you what the judge said." He said, "I think the photographer made a mistake, but I liked the results." So even back then, they weren't really accepting this kind of photography, but he liked the way it looked. And that, to me, that got me very excited, and it motivated me to continue. So gardens, a great place to do this is in a garden with a lot of different colors. And you take your straight shots of the garden to get the record shot of it. But just by slowly moving your camera and hitting the shutter button, you create more of a feeling of more of like a painting than a photograph. I love doing this technique with trees. This was done in Blackwater Wildlife Refuge down in Maryland. And again, you just move your camera up and down, hit the shutter button, and you get something like this. So it's important that you have good light. The one thing I like about this image is that I had early morning light, side lighting the trees. I had a little blue sky in the background. So I had multiple shades and multiple variations of color. It's advisable not to do this technique when you have trees with branches coming off the sides and either going up or going to the side, because then you get all these little jagged lines that you see in this image. So you see how that kind of takes away from the smoothness of the composition. Whereas if you take a shot of the trees that don't have those kind of those branches coming out, see, it makes a more, I think, more impactful image. So when you're looking at a subject, if you see branches coming out, you may want to pass that by. And you really want to find trees that have, very long trunks and all the leaves are at the top, and you're really just photographing the trunks of the trees. Another example, this was done down by the DNR Canal. And in this particular composition, I wanted to, make one of the trees the star of the show. So I got that larger tree that's in the foreground, a little off center, and late afternoon light. So it's a nice warm setting, late afternoon light illuminating the trees. And the other thing I did in this particular case, and I try to do when I do this kind of thing, is as I'm walking around, I take a look at the trees that I want to photograph. And then I try to position myself so there's as much separation between each of those trees before I take the shot. And that's a good exercise for two reasons. Number one, I think it gives you a better image, a little bit more organized, easier to look at. But it's also a good exercise to practice trying to make sure you're looking at all the elements in your photograph. And I don't like mergers. I think mergers kind of clutter a picture. So whenever I do my photography, I try to find areas that are separated. So I think, one element isn't blocking another. So this is a good exercise to get your brain to start thinking like that. Another example, in this case, I had a nice S-curve here. I had a nice path going into the woods. Okay. Now with this photograph, now not only do you have some vertical lines as you do with the trees, but you also have the horizontal lines. So you've got the horizontal lines of the cabins, the roof of the cabins. You've got the meadow, the horizontal line of the meadow. And as you can see, the trees are kind of blending in or kind of merging into the meadow itself. So you've got the meadow, but then you got visions of the tree in the meadow. So in some cases, you may have to do a little extra work in post-processing. So for this image, what I did is I cleaned that up using my clone tool. So I got rid of the areas where the trees were merging into the meadow. I added more color and contrast to the buildings. I tried to even off the roof to make it more square and more even. And of course, I added a little vignette and did some contrasting, saturation, and so forth. So, this is right out of the camera, not ready for prime time, but I think with a little editing, I was able to get it. So it was something that was worth looking at. Great thing for morning sunrises. Instead of taking the same old sunrise picture where you've got the sun just coming over the horizon, use some camera motion. And in this particular case, I moved my camera from left to right as the shutter was open. So it creates more of an artistic or painterly look to a sunrise shot. Same thing here, morning sunrise before the sun comes up. In this particular case, I kind of, instead of just going straight, I kind of did a little loop at the beginning to give that kind of that wavy look to it. And another example of, you ask yourself, is it really worth doing all this kind of photography? This particular image I was able to sell to an architectural firm who was designing a new office space, and they purchased this. They wanted it printed at 85 by 54 or something. I couldn't find a printer to print that big. There was a printer in Germany who would do it, but it was like $5,000. So they said, well, we have a sign company that can duplicate that and give us what we need. So I sold them the digital image and allowed them to print it. So I got a sale out of this kind of a photograph, and which I never would have thought of. Who's going to buy stuff like this? But people are interested, and I think the reason is because it's different. It's different than your standard photographs. Okay. Any questions about motion blur? Okay. All right. We still have a little bit further to go. we talk about capturing moving subjects. And I've seen a lot of photographers in camera clubs around the state do this kind of work. But it's fun and it gives you a different look. So basically what I'm talking about is when you have something moving, it could be a car, it could be a bicycle rider, it could be an animal. Instead of taking that freeze the action shot, you slow down your shutter speed to about a 40th of a second. And then as the subject is moving, you pan with the subject and take the photograph. Now, the idea is to try to keep the subject as sharp as possible while blurring the background. And I think in this particular case, I was able to do that. And because it was a slow shutter speed, you get a little bit of motion in the feed as it's running. And I really like what it did to the background, as opposed to just the grass and dirt that's there. It made it more, I think, artistic. Same thing with flying birds, a great way to do this. Now, 1/100th of a second isn't that slow, but when you have a bird doing this, it's a little bit slow, so you get that motion blur of the birds flying. Up in Alaska, we were out there. It was kind of a cloudy, rainy day, so instead of pumping my ISO up to 3600 to freeze the action, I slowed down my shutter speed to 1/15th of a second, and as the bears were running through the water chasing salmon, I was doing slow exposures of the bears as they were running. My son was into go-kart racing for a couple of years, about maybe 10 years ago. He's into a lot of stuff. He tries everything. But go-kart racing was one. We went out and bought a go-kart and the whole thing. So this is not my son, but I went to an event where he was driving his go-kart. I was capturing the drivers as they were coming around the track. And I think kind of the slow exposure makes it a little more artistic than, I have some of the, freeze the action shot. But this to me really shows the motion more than a freeze the action type of shot. This was a lucky shot. I actually won a ribbon in Cranford-Millburn with this photograph many, many years ago. So I was photographing. I wanted to get the bike rider as we were driving down the street. And as I hit the shutter button, a taxi car drove by. So that's the motion of the taxi passing this bike rider. And I kind of liked it. And somebody who was judging at our club thought it was pretty good too. So sometimes you need luck sometimes to get those unusual shots. Wave motion, this is fun to do. It's you go to the beach, if you go to the beach to photograph birds, there's no birds around. If you got some waves coming in, you can spend some time practicing just panning with the waves as they're coming in. Now, the first time I tried to do that, this is one of my first shots attempting with this technique. Again, I was with Tony Sweet. I was fortunate to take a workshop with him many years ago, and we were doing sunset pictures along the shore. And he tapped me on the shoulder. He says, come with me. He says, go stand over here on this jetty. And then as the waves are coming in, just pan with them and start taking some photographs. So he gave me some settings that I should try to use. And, I like the technique. I kind of like the look of, waves in motion. And I've seen a lot of photographers doing this these days as well. Another example, 1/15th of a second, ISO 100. Okay, you want to slow your shutter down. And this was done down in Cape May as well. The water this particular morning was green, which wasn't very attractive. So I turned it into black and white. Okay, capturing images from a car. Now, warning, you have to be the passenger. Do not be the driver and take pictures from your car because you'll be pulled over or you'll have an accident. So basically what I did, it was actually with Nick Palmieri when I took this shot. We were up in the Adirondacks. We're driving down the road. The evergreen trees were covered with snow. So I stuck my camera out the window, and as we were driving, I did this. I just kind of moved my arms around, up and down. I don't know what exact, but no steady motion. I wasn't holding it steady. I was kind of moving, shaking the camera, and this is the result, which I think it's kind of cool. It kind of looks like paint strokes. And I kind of like it. It's an abstract. You would never know that these were trees covered with snow. I saw somebody in this club. I looked at your photographs before I came over. I saw somebody in your club who won an award with a picture like this, where probably motion, either that they were doing light painting with the lights with the camera open, or they were driving by and doing this. In this particular technique, a 30-second exposure where we're driving past holiday lights in a park down in Annapolis, and I couldn't get the straight shot, so I slowed down my shutter speed and just did this. Just threw my camera all over the place. No rhyme or reason. Just kind of moved it haphazardly and got something like this. This was from a train, an autumn train ride in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And again, it's 1/10 of a second, but as the train's moving, I'm just going past the fall colors, just created this pattern of, it looks like this could be a fabric. You can make a fabric out of this and make a dress. You could do something with it. Okay, zooms and turns. This is another technique. Gives you some unique images. So basically, you can use any zoom lens. It works best when the camera is on a tripod. It doesn't have to be. Another note here: if you don't have a zoom lens, I've had people I've worked with have a fixed lens, and they would zoom by just doing this, hitting the shutter, and just pulling the camera back. Pretty much gives you the same effect. But I use a zoom lens, and the idea is to, as the shutter's open, you want to zoom out from your subject. So here's an example. Works great with flowers. So I had my camera on a tripod, and I hit the shutter button. As soon as I hit the shutter button, I zoomed out, and it captured 1/13 of a second. It captured an image like this. Similar technique, same technique, and in post-processing, in order to keep the rule of third gurus happy, I moved it down to the lower third. Make sure I get a good score. Attempted this in Italy. When we were in Italy, we were in Venice for a couple of days, and same technique. So you can see whatever's in the center of the picture stays relatively sharp. And then the areas that are further away from the center have got more of a dramatic zoom effect. And again, this was the, what's the name of it? Holland Ridge Farm. I think that's the name.
Holland Ridge.
Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
Down in South Jersey? Yeah. If you haven't been there, you got to go. Really beautiful. It's fields and fields of tulips. And same technique, just zooming out and then recomposing it in post-processing. Turns is another technique. So in this particular case, you need a lens that has a collar, and you can mount the lens on the tripod, because what you're going to do is, as the shutter's open, you're going to turn the camera. So you need the lens is going to be fixed, but the camera is going to turn. And that's kind of one of the earlier ones I've attempted. So it gives you that kind of circular effect. Another example. So again, works good with flowers. I haven't tried it with too many other subjects. Most of you probably know Jackie Dickert. I'm sure she's come here before. She's tried zooms and turn at the same time. How creative she gets. So again, the beauty about all these techniques is no rules. Your imagination is your limits. So you can try both. You can try one, try different subjects. And chances are you'll get, a couple of keepers. You may throw a lot, you may delete a lot of pictures, but that's okay. It's digital. It's not slide film. Okay, multiple exposures. I told you the story early on that, the first multiple exposure photography I saw was at the Guggenheim Museum. So I like doing multiple exposures. I kind of think of it as impressionism with a camera. So we all know about impressionism. It was an art form back in the 1860s. Your Monet, your Renoir, your Van Gogh. That's the style of painting. So this is Monet's Japanese bridge at Monet's garden. Kathy and I went there specifically to go to this garden in springtime so I can get a picture of this bridge and do my multiple exposure. I want to try to recreate this with a camera. Unfortunately, the company that we went with took us there on a Sunday afternoon on a holiday weekend. So, first of all, I had to wait in line to get to see the bridge. And then when I saw the bridge, it was just covered with people. So I never got the shot. But this is kind of the look I'm looking for when I do multiple exposures. So what I do, I have to use my Canon 5D camera. Not all cameras can do multiple exposures to the extent that I like to do them. So the Canon allows me to take 9 photographs in one shot. So what the camera does, it'll take 9 pictures, it'll average them together, and then at the end of the day, you have one picture that was composited from those 9 individual shots. So the camera does all the work, as far as the technique and the composition go. You're the one who creates it by how you move the camera. I have an Olympus camera, and they only allow 2 multiple exposures. Huh?
What's the difference between that and stacking?
Well, stacking, you're taking multiple exposures, but then you're taking them at different focal points. So what I'm doing here is I'm not changing the focal point. The focal point will be stagnant. It'll be the same. I'm just moving the camera to kind of, it's like adding paint to a canvas. So every shot is like adding more paint. And I'll show you an example in a minute.
You can do that with a camera manually. I mean, you don't, I have a Sony, it doesn't do multiple exposures.
Well, you could do it manually, yeah, and then merge it. You can do the processing and post-processing. Right, exactly.
I think that's what
To me, that's too much work. I like doing it in camera. I can do it in camera with the Canon, so I like to do it that way. But you definitely can do it the other way. But then you have to do a lot of blending and so forth. So that's and if you're good at that, you can do that. Absolutely. Okay, so here's an example of what that effect looks like. So this is not a really great picture. It's cluttered. There's no really set shape or anything, nothing to kind of really look at to pull you in. But by taking multiple exposures of the same subject, now it looks a little more interesting. Now I've got some shapes here. The background is less cluttered. So just by taking that, you can make something that's relatively boring and make it a little bit more interesting. This is at Monet's Garden. So this is 9 exposures. And again, 9 exposures, slightly moving the camera. Not big moves, but very, fraction of an inch, up, down, over, back. And, there's no formula. It's all experimental. And, you have to decide how far. But you want to make the motions very, very small. You don't want to move too much. Okay, so I love doing this on the cherry trees at Colonial Park. So in the springtime, they're absolutely beautiful. So here's kind of an example of how I would do it. So I would take one shot, then I'd move it down, maybe down to the side, then I'd move over, then I'd go up, and then I'd go down, and then back and forth. I'm very slight, kind of moving it like a triangle. And by doing that, at the end of the 9 exposures, the camera blends those together and gives me something like this. So, talk about, I've had success with this type of photography. This was on exhibit at Terminal A in Newark Airport last year, and got paid a pretty good price for it too. So again, the things I seem to sell, I don't sell as much of my straight photography as I do this creative stuff. And again, I think it's because it's different. Not everybody does this kind of work. And then I go back at, springtime. I went back in summer, went back in fall, and recently went back after a recent snowstorm. So I plan on printing this, the 4 seasons. So. Okay, similar technique, but now there's a little bit of a challenge here. And the challenge is the little vase down there. So as I'm moving the camera, I'm capturing multiple vases in different locations. So you can see I've got a vase on the lower part, and then I've got, one off to the right and another one behind it. So I need to, in post-processing, clean that up. And using a clone tool, very easy to do. And there's the final version where I created one vase out of the multiple vases. And then the multiple exposure effect still stays there on the flowers and the trees and so forth. Another example, this is a garden in Ireland. So I like the effect on the trees and the bushes. I don't like the effect on the stone walkway going up into the back of the garden. So again, in post-processing, I clean up those rocks, make them look like a single shot. Another thing you could do is take a single shot of the garden and then blend in just the rocks in that section. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. 9 exposures. This is Brooklyn Botanical Garden, done a couple of years ago in May when all the trees were in bloom. And this one I've included some people, so the people are not sharp, but there's people walking down that aisle, that pathway. Okay, one of my inspirations for this technique is a gentleman by the name of Pep Ventosa. He was born in, I believe, Barcelona. He lives in San Francisco now. And he does his technique similar to what you were saying, taking multiple exposures and then bringing them into post-processing and blending them in Photoshop. Okay, so that's the step he takes. But one of the things he does that's a little different than just straight multiple exposure is that he'll do what's called he'll walk around the subject. So for example, there's a tree, he'll take a shot and he'll walk around that subject, taking it from different angles. Okay. And so what that does is it creates multiple different versions of the background. So the tree itself, because I'm walking around and filling the frame with that tree, that stays pretty much stable, except with that multiple exposure feel, but the background is different. So you get a little bit of the background here, and because you're taking multiple exposures, it doesn't give you a full exposure of the background, but it does give you the full exposure of the tree because I'm multiplying the tree. So the way I do that is I use my focal point. I always put my focal point on the trunk of the tree because I want the trunk to look like a single shot as much as possible. So I'm always pointing at the trunk and as I'm walking around, and plus it keeps the image pretty much on top of each other. So each image is relatively where it's supposed to be. Another example, this is walking halfway around the tree. Did not do well in the latest competition. I entered this in the creative, and I've got a 22. So
I didn't think a 22 was too bad.
it was. I needed a 24. I needed a 20. So anyway, but that goes back to my point. Not everybody appreciates this type of photography. So one of the judges, I think, gave me a 6. I don't know who it was, but I'm going to find out.
Yeah, it was.
You don't have to confess. Okay, so here's another example. Again, walking around the tree, and you can see that the background looks like almost like it's in fog. All right, to get a strong sense of the tree, but the background looks, not as strong. Another example of the technique here is a gazebo in Colonial Park. So this is an 8-sided gazebo. I took 9 shots, 2 of the front of it, and then I walked around and I took each of the other sides with separate shots. I also took a single shot before I did the multiple exposure because I wanted to use part of this photograph on the multiple exposure. And the part that I wanted to use was the top of the gazebo. So here's a single shot. Here's the multiple exposure. So you can see the roof looks kind of funky. It's not really, you got all these little edges and the top of the gazebo is multiple exposed and you got multiple tops of the gazebo. But I like the effect of all the other areas. The background I really like. So I took that top of the gazebo and I blended it in with the multiple exposure image and created a version like this. So again, I really like what goes on in the background. It almost looks like the trees are in fog, and I like that effect. And that's something that if you ever look at Pep Ventosa's work, you'll see a lot of that. Another example, I took a multiple exposure of this fountain, again, Colonial Park. And then I also took a single shot of the fountain and then blended the single shot of the fountain into the multiple exposure photograph to create this. Okay, another multiple exposure technique you can use is to create what's called the Orton effect. And what this involves is taking one image that's sharp, a second image that's blurry or out of focus, and then blending them together. So I started using or practicing this technique when I was shooting slide film. And in the slide film days, what you would do is you would take one sharp picture, then you would take another slide out of focus, and then when you got the slides back from developing, you would take both of those slides together, put it in a new slide holder. I was calling it a slide sandwich. That's what they would call it. And then you would have the out of focus slide behind the in focus slide, and it creates a look like this. Kind of gives it a kind of a glowing effect. It's another example. Again, two slides, one in focus, one out of focus, blending those, sandwiching those two slides together to give it kind of that glowing look. So the way you do it with in multiple exposure on any camera, because they only need two shots for this. So you would take the first shot in focus, you would take the second shot out of focus. So shot number one is in focus. The second shot is out of focus. Of course, these are two separate images, but in the camera, this is what the camera is doing. It creates one image that's sharp, one image that's out of focus, and then gives you that blend of the out of focus and the blurry image to give it more of a glowing effect. So that's one good technique you can use, but there's also another way to do this, and I'm going to go beyond, I'm going to go back into the computer, because I find the computer version of doing this is a lot, I think it creates a nicer effect. So I'm going to show you some slides. I'm not going to read them to you. Shows you another slide I'm not going to read to you. But basically, I will send out notes after this. I'll send them to Ellen, and she can distribute it to the club with how to do this in Photoshop. And it's really easy. And that's the straight image, and then that's the one that I use the Orton effect using that Photoshop technique. So it's a different look. Again, competition-wise, if you're concerned about competitions, judges may or may not like this. I know I put this in, I got a 6 in some competition because the judge didn't like this kind of technique. But again, you're shooting, I hope you don't shoot just for judges. You know, you want to shoot for yourself. And if you like it, something like this, I wouldn't mind hanging on my wall. I like it. I like the look, I like the feel. And so I shoot for myself first, and then I shoot for everybody else later. Another use of that effect, again, this is the Photoshop technique of creating that Orton effect. If you ever want to go get pictures like this, keep an eye out for the Red Hawk. What is it?
Red Hawk.
Yeah, they're an organization out of Brooklyn, New York. They're a Native American organization, the Red Hawk, and they have these powwows starting in July in New Jersey. They're down in Middlesex County, and they come out with all the dancing and everything, and so you get a lot of great shots of these folks doing their dancing in their native costumes. The key here is when you go to these events. You know, if you're taking pictures, usually they're going to be in the center, and all around them are going to be tents and lawn chairs, and people, and all kinds of distraction. So the way I got this photograph is I laid on the ground, used a long lens, positioned myself so they would pass a background that was clear, some trees in the distance. Because I was shooting down, I was able to eliminate all the distractions. So you're not going to you can get full body shots, but there'll be distractions. But if you want portraits, lay on the ground, shoot up, get a nice background, and that's how you can get something like this.
And you actually took 2 pictures for that?
And no, this is actually done with the Photoshop technique. So I had one image, and then, like I said, I'll send you the instructions on how to
okay.
do this, and it creates the same
I got
effect.
you.
Okay. Again, this is from Tony Sweet. He's the one who taught us to do this. And if you don't know who Tony Sweet is, check him out. He's really, really good. Okay, long exposures. This is something I started doing in landscape photography. Kathy and I traveled extensively with a gentleman by the name of Peter Gordon. He's an Irish photographer and very creative landscape photography. Minimalism is kind of his specialty, but he does a lot of these long exposures. And to me, it creates more of a dreamy landscape photograph. So how do you do it? Well, first of all, you're going to need a tripod because, again, the exposures are going to be long. And you're also going to need a neutral density filter. Now, these are filters that are really dark, and the purpose of these filters is to stop the light from coming in, or make the light come in very slowly, because it's dark, so you need long exposures in order to properly expose an image. So it's like, subtracting a lot of stops. You can get them in four stop, 5 stop, 6 stop, 10 stop versions. It's helpful to have one of these little filter holders that you can put on your lens, so you're not holding it with your hand. And so the effect you get is something like this. So this is the Delaware River from the Pennsylvania side, shooting over to New Jersey. And this is your straight shot. So you take the picture, fast shutter speed, freezes the action, and so forth. But by adding a 10-stop neutral density filter, all of a sudden that water smooths out, almost looks like ice, and you see the motion in the clouds. And for me, and everything that isn't moving remains sharp, which is nice. So you've got the contrast between the motion and the sharpness of the images of the areas that are not moving. So I think that looks a lot more interesting than something like this. And to me, this is a record shot. To me, this is more something that maybe you want to, maybe make a print of, for example. So another example, this is in Ireland, straight shot. 76-second exposure using a 10-stop neutral density filter. Again, the water smooths out, the cloud motion, but everything else that's not moving is sharp. So you still have that sharp here, but then the water is smooth and you got the motion of the cloud. So it's a fun technique. You can get all kinds of different effects. You can fool around with shutter speeds and different filter densities. But the challenge about doing this is when you put that dark filter on your camera, a couple of things. Your camera can't really determine the proper exposure because it's just blocking too much light. The other thing it can't do is focus, because there's nothing to focus on because it's so dark. So what you need to do is, number one, you take a shot without the filter. After you take that shot, you turn your autofocus off. You've already established your focus by your first shot. Put the filter on your camera and then use what's called an exposure calculator. I use Nisi filter, so I have the Nisi calculator. These are diamond. They're all free on apps. So you can go on phone apps and get all kinds of applications like this. So basically what you do is you take the picture, you tell the app what was the shutter speed on the picture you took without the filter. Okay, 12/50th of a second. Okay, what filter did you put on your camera? A 6-stop. Okay, well, your shutter speed should be 20 seconds. Okay, so the calculator will figure that out for you. When I first started doing this, I kept taking a shot, it was black, taking another shot, and I had this manual. I kept changing my settings. This takes all the guesswork out of it. So you definitely want to download. They're all free. You don't have to pay for this. Okay, shapes and patterns in nature. So this is going beyond just what you're doing with your camera, and this talks more about your eyes, what you find in nature that is more artistic than your traditional landscape shots. So an example, this is the Painted Hills in Oregon. It's not a big place. It takes a couple hours to get there, and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. When I went there, there's a park in the center of the town, which is Mitchell, Oregon. And I think Nick Palmieri was with me. We camped in the square in the park. And so $5 to camp in the park. But it's not a big place. To get this shot, you park in a parking lot and you walk up a trail. There's actually a bench right here. So for those of you who are lazy photographers like me, you sit down, you can take the picture. But this is the shot that everybody gets, because this is like the viewpoint. And I wanted to get that shot to kind of show the beauty of this landscape. But I wanted more. And what I normally do when I do landscape photography is I bring a long lens with me, 200 millimeter, 1:400, something like that. And then after I take these shots, I put the long lens on and I start exploring the fine detail within the landscape and look for some interesting patterns. And one of the shots I got by doing that was this shot. Now, I would venture that not too many, if anybody else, has this exact photograph, because I had to find it by zooming into a small section of that big landscape. I encourage you, when you're shooting landscapes, take your traditional landscape shots, but then get the long lens and look for some fine detail within that landscape, and you might find some real gems there. Something similar to this, I showed this earlier too. This is kind of an abstract, but Mother Nature does the same thing. This is the Death Valley, the bottom of the Death Valley, and look at all those colors. And very similar to what somebody created using some very abstract art. Ice is a great subject. Walk around with your, macro lens or, standard 24 to 105 lens, and just take small sections of ice. And those could be beautiful works of art, because, the ice bubbles and all the things. And you can find those anywhere. This was actually done up in Canada, but you can find these in New Jersey. You got a day when it rains and the next morning it freezes, you get all these ice formations along the street. You can find very similar types of shots. And finally, reflections. I'm encouraging you to look for what's called abstracts created by sky pools and land pools. And basically what that is that when you're standing either by a lake or a pond, and it's kind of a windy day, you'll notice that the water's kind of rippling. And as it's rippling, it's reflecting the sky or the shoreline, depending on the angle that you're standing. And then, so you watch those patterns and just start taking photographs of the water as it's changing patterns. Now, here's an example. This is not an example, but this is kind of what I was going for. Jackson Pollock, I don't know if you're familiar with his artwork. I kind of like him. I think he's an acquired taste, I think. But I can sit and look at this painting all day, and I find all kinds of things in here. I find a bull, I find a cat, I find all these little things that are buried in there. But there's no rhyme or reason. It's really just a lot of shapes, textures, and colors. And so that's what I look for when I'm looking for sky pools and land pools. So here's a photograph from Ireland. This is from Dublin. There's some historic buildings in the foreground, and the buildings in the back, I believe, were built by Google for their employees. So you got the juxtaposition of the modern buildings and the old buildings. So I like the shot, but I like what was going on in the water. And there were buildings all along this river, and the water was rippling. So I looked and started taking close-ups of just the water reflecting the buildings, and got something like this. And I kind of like this kind of stuff. You may not like it, but I find all these different patterns. I can sit and look through this, for extended period of time, looking for things that might be buried in here. Another example, this was done up in the Adirondacks. The gold is the gold colors of the leaves in the trees, and the white is the bark of the trees. That white bark with the gold colored leaves, and that's what the water was reflecting. And finally, this one that was taken up in Alaska. We were on a boat, and the sky had clouds that had blue skies, and I was standing over the boat looking straight down, and as the water's moving, it's creating all these different patterns. Inverted reflection. So I show you this picture because the picture I'm going to show you next is something I had created before I found this one, but this kind of reminds me of it. This is kind of what I was looking for when I did mine. And you'll probably all recognize it. This is from not Colonial Park, but Nomahagan Park right here in Cranford. So autumn, instead of taking pictures of the shoreline with the trees and the reflection, I'm photographing just the reflection. And then I take that picture of a reflected tree in the water, I invert it, do a little contrast, a little saturation, and create this. So this kind of similar to that, right? Close enough. But I kind of like this. To me, it looks like this was created with a paintbrush. And that's kind of the look I was going for. What does this look like to anybody in the audience? Skyline? Yeah, yeah. Buildings, yeah. Yeah. It's not realistic, but you know what it is, right? Yeah, so that's kind of the point. So I did something similar. This was along in Venice, walking along the canals, and then taking picture of the buildings reflecting in the canal, and then inverting it to make these kind of spooky looking buildings. I see the Hobbit living in here. Another use of reflection. This was at the 9/11 memorial, and this couple, I guess, getting married, doing their wedding pictures. But as I was looking at them, I noticed that their reflection was in the memorial. So I took a picture of that. And to me, this is like ghosts in the 9/11 memorial. So to me, it's kind of eerie, but it kind of tells a story. Okay, and finally, look for interesting details. This is your typical sunset picture. This is at Blackwater Wildlife Refuge. But what I was interested in was this little area where all the sticks were kind of in the water, reflecting into the water. And so again, I took out my long lens, 100 to 400, zoomed into that, and created this image. Okay, so instead of the grand landscape, look for interesting detail. And it could be in landscape, it could be man-made, doesn't matter. But there's also very interesting details that, if you capture them, can create more artistic and more, I guess, more abstract type of a photograph. So that's my speech for the night. Let's be creative. I want you to think outside the box. There's no rules for this stuff. You go out there, you experiment, and try different things. Intentional camera motion. You will find a bunch of photographers who do this kind of work. Now, this is nothing that's unique to my photography. There is a magazine called ICM Photo Magazine, dedicated to just this type of photography. And they have a Facebook page so you can see what other people are doing. And of course, have fun. This is a fun way to get out of a funk. You know, how many birds can you photograph in your lifetime, right? So get out there and try something different. I think this will give you a lot of satisfaction. One more thing, if you're interested in Impressionism and you're interested in Van Gogh, to be specific, check out this film. This is the only film ever created by individual drawings. So the entire film, I think they had like 130 artists working on this. So the whole story is created by individual, like what they should do with Mickey Mouse, you know, individuals, and they put them together. Individual drawings by some top-notch artists, and visually, it's an amazing film. And if you're interested in Van Gogh, it tells his story. So it's a great film. That's all I have. Thankfully, my computer decided to work. So are there any questions from the floor or from the, online?
Any questions from online? If there aren't any questions from Zoom, I'm going to shut it down and say goodnight to everybody.
Good night.